Hey everybody, so in today's video, we've got the definitive buyer's guide, the ultimate video regarding everything MGB with Ted Axe. The one and the only.
And there's a reason for that.
So Ted runs this shop here in Colorado called Axe and Allies, and he is the definitive British car expert, maybe on the west coast of the US.
Boy, you're really overpitching me, man. I'm like, also ran third in this town, maybe. But thanks, Tommy. I'll take it. I'm going with your version.
So Ted, you have worked on probably hundreds of MGBs over the years, wouldn't you say?
Yeah.
It's been quite a number. And you own this one, you've owned several, and I just want to have this big, long video talking to folks whether or not A, they should buy one and what they should look out for, and the pros and the cons of old MG ownership.
By the way, all the MG goobers watching this are gonna nitpick this car to death, and they're gonna nitpick my knowledge to death. I can take it. I can sort of take it. I'm a little fragile, but I can mostly take it. If I was just talking to a friend that was, MG curious, but not really that committed, right?
Yeah.
In a way, you can almost paint them with, say, 3 different brushes.
Okay.
Maybe 4 if you include what they call the pillow dash car. But so, as a sweeping generalization, up through 67 looked like this. They sat low, they had chrome bumpers, they had lots of little chrome whale baleen for a grille, they had a steel dashboard, and I get that there's delineations between those cars, 3-main versus 5-main engine, pull knob headlight switch versus paddle switch, pull out door handles, but this is all like, even value-wise, it's so subtle. Even the engine, the 3-main versus 5, is such an opinion thing. But just to stereotype, value-wise and at a glance, the average person won't see the difference from day 1 through 67.
Okay.
And then 68, you still had chrome bumpers, you had a different inset on the grille, and this is where safety regulations, Britain was export or die, right? So most of their cars came to us.
So you have pre-67, and then in 68 they went to the squishy dash.
Yeah, so you had the pillow dash, so you had your cluster of gauges for the driver, and in front of the passenger seat it was literally just a pillow. It was kind of, if ever there was a place for that get in, sit down, shut up, and hang on sticker, that's the car, right? Because it's basically just a big old pad saying, whatever I do, you'll be okay, honey. So 74, you had bumper changes galore. The early ones were still chrome, although there was an extra, they were more reinforced behind the scenes, so you can spot those with a little extra bolt in the center of the rear or something along those lines. But they started out chrome, and then they went to chrome with some gigantic rubber blocks.
Okay.
Affectionately known in British circles as the Sabrina bumpers. Sabrina Duncan, look it up. Anyhow, and then the very late 74, they went to the full-on rubber, and here, Uncle Sam again, we had to have our headlights higher, because heaven forbid that our headlights are so low that other big vehicles can't see us. And so the answer to that was to raise the suspension. So the rubber bumpers came side by side with an elevated ride height, which all these subtle differences used to mean so much to purists. And I think as we all get farther away from the cars, we care less. It used to be, when I was younger, you couldn't give me a rubber bumper B.
Yeah.
And a chrome bumper B was like really cool. Even Bs, I think they're kind of undervalued because they're not special enough.
Right.
They made too many of them. I think E-types have the same problem for that matter.
So you
you
kind of have 3 different generations. So you've got pre-67, you've got, sounds like 67 to like mid-70s.
Yeah.
And then you have like the late 70s. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that's very fair. And the late 70s, so some smog equipment kicked in 1968, like an air pump and things like that. But then starting in 76, I guess, you had catalytic converters, and this is the real tragedy, up through 74, you still had a decent engine with twin carburetors. Starting in 75, the delightful SUs went away in favor of the Stromberg, which I think is honestly, this best use for a Stromberg is as a wheel chock if your parking brake fails. I hate those things. And they're on the stupidest manifold with a nice hot catalytic converter right below your leaky Stromberg carburetor, but nothing bad ever came of that. And it's kind of sad, too, because that whole emissions-friendly system. So here in Colorado, we actually have to deal with emissions tests, or at least in the Front Range. And the hardest cars to get to run well and pass, the hardest ones to get clean are the emissions compliant cars. Now, I realize the state and the federal government at the time were measuring different things and different standards, but the supposed clean cars are slow and terrible running and not. I mean, I've all but given up on those things.
So what's kind of the most desirable of the MGB world?
I think the sweeping generalization, again, it's narrowing. I don't think people care as much as they used to.
Okay.
But I do think 67 and earlier, because of the lean, clean, supposed better performance, the low stance, all the chrome, the steel dash, and the steel dash just doesn't fade and crack in the sun, right? So, it's kind of nice just from that point of view. I don't think there's anything inherently hideous about the later dashes. They just don't survive they don't survive the elements. They don't survive actual use because the switches are so flimsy and stuff.
So, Ted, over the some 20 years that they built these cars, were the basic engine architectures the same?
Yes. I mean, they're an evolution of, where did it first show up? The MGA, I guess, but also a lot of their sedans. But yeah, so they're weird in that they have what's called a Siamese port exhaust.
Okay.
So cylinders number 2 and 3 share an exhaust port in the head, which I think people will say that kind of accounts for their unusual sound.
Huh.
I'm so used to that unusual sound that I don't find it unusual anymore. But yeah, in essence, again, they're kind of, same shit, different pile. 4-cylinder, overhead valve, push rods and lifters. They're not exotic. They're pretty darn durable. They're
Whoa, okay,
they're actually.
This is where the YouTuber comments are going to blow up.
I know.
So, what makes them durable compared to other British cars of the era?
Okay, for one thing, the bearing caps are cast as part of the block, so they're fully supported. The main bearing caps, I should say, are kind of fully shrouded in the block, which is a lot stronger than, say, Triumph, that just has. Well, I should say that the Spitfire and TR6 family of Triumphs. The main bearing caps are kind of like just the bottom of a rod cap. It just kind of bolts onto the engine. And on, say, a Triumph, the bearing shells are, good grief, if they're 3/8 of an inch wide, I'd be surprised. It's ridiculous. So they have reasonably strong, large surface areas on the main bearings.
Okay.
And on the rod bearings. And they have thrust washers that can actually withstand, clutch use, unlike, say, a Triumph. If you can just watch the crankshafts move back and forth on those. And there are no truly fragile parts on the engine as far as design. If you were going to criticize British anything, I think metallurgy might let them down.
Okay.
Like the Japanese have the reputation for the engines that go a gajillion miles. I kind of feel like if this engine had been built with the sort of metallurgy that you would expect in the trade at the time, they would be even better yet. As it is, if they're well cared for, if you actually service it, which I know that was antithetical to American ownership habits at the time because we had big V8s that didn't really have to work very hard for their supper. And so you just kind of ran them until the oil pressure light came on and then dumped some more in. But if you actually took care of these, this is sort of true of anything, any finicky machine, right? But just from my working on them, the longevity of even a moderately maintained MGB is better than any of the other British sports cars, which I would say a close second to the MGA because they're kind of the same thing mechanically.
So let's put a number to that, and this is where you're going to hate me. But if someone came in and it was like, I'm looking for a moderately maintained MGB. If you figure like throughout the 60s and 70s, right, some engines could only last 50,000 miles before rebuilds. A Mercedes might last like 100. Where does this kind of fall into the mix?
I think if it's well maintained, again, of course, driving style factors into it also.
Sure.
I have seen plenty of 80,000 original mile MGBs that still had engines with a lot of future in them.
What are some of the common things that you recommend people do when they buy an MGB, they bring it to you like, I want it to run better? What do you tell them?
This is where I'm going to pat myself on the back too much.
Yeah?
If they want it to run better, let me tune it up. It sounds so stupid, but I mean, the carburetors, your average MGB, whether it still has that terrible Stromberg on it, and I know that's going to get comments that are making me out to be but whatever, I'll stand by it. But the twin SUs, I like the SU carburetors, but there are a lot of moving parts. So they're susceptible to dust, and they're susceptible to owners that don't understand them. And even if you read in the owner's manual, when I was a kid, right, everybody had a Haynes manual. You kind of learned it from there, and it would show you the little listen to the airflow, and then it would describe the mixture adjustment. And to this day, I run into people that equate the mixture adjustment as something they are doing with the airflow meter, and it's two separate operations. So just the lack of competent servicing and repair and bad ideas applied to fixing carburetors by hobbyists, very often I can go through. In fact, if I've never worked on a car and somebody brings it to me and says, I want you to tune it up, and this makes me sound like some sort of a bank robber, but if I've never worked on the car, your tune-up kind of, and if you want it tuned up without disclaimers, I get to pluck your carburetors off, take them apart, go through them, clean them up, sign off on everything that isn't right, put them back together, check for vacuum leaks and all that kind of stuff. And then, of course, a quick valve adjustment and a timing check. And then we start twirling the screws that makes it run right.
Okay.
From that day forward, when people come back and they have a problem where it's not quite what they think it should be, and this sounds vain, I'll take it. I already know that I've been through the carburetor, so I just know simply to look for other sources of the problem, or you do learn to mistrust certain parts. Rear floats on HIFs are just prone to saturating.
Good to know.
And things like that. So from that day forward, I can quickly diagnose and bring them back up to, if needed though. I have other people that constantly are like, oh, you tuned my car up 7 years ago and it's still as good as it was the day you did it and all that. But so that would be one of the things. If somebody came to me with a car that was new to them and they wanted something more out of it, or just the peace of mind, I would encourage them to sign up for the ridiculously expensive tune-up.
Now, is this a situation where like someone comes in with a Stromberg car and you're just like, Webers, just take them off, put Webers on it?
Sort of. The Stromberg, because of the way it breathes through the crankcase, is this too technically
No, go for
stupid?
it. It's fine. Just go for it.
Again, I hate to go down a rabbit hole, but in SU, I can take it apart, I can build it, or I can just look at it, and I can preset it, and I can hand it to somebody and say, this is going to start, and it's going to run pretty good for you. With a Stromberg, I can't do that. Fundamentally, they're the same carburetor with a different design parameter, and yet the subtlest, most invisible differences or the cars that they're going on, there's something that makes it impossible for me to predict those.
All right, Ted, so we talked a little bit about some of the pros and the cons of the engine, but let's talk about this little bad boy right here. What do you do if you want to make your MG really move?
Well, my favorite recipe is to scribble out a big check to Moss Motors for their Supercharger kit. If this sounds like a shameless plug for the Moss Supercharger kit,
what do they cost?
Trust me, I'm getting no money for this. I think now they're I think they're on the past the $5,000 mark.
Wow, okay.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Now, to be fair, dollars per horsepower or horsepower per dollar, that's probably pretty good value.
Sure.
But this is where MG people are gonna. I'll bet everybody's gonna get all divided, because you can build. You were asking me about MG engines before, and there were all sorts of internal differences. Differences in the cylinder head, differences in the piston top. Well, obviously piston material, but also shape. In fact, this is trivia crap again, but the emissions, the later, what they call the smog head with the water choke port on it for my favorite Stromberg, has a very small combustion chamber, which should equal high compression, but the pistons are like dog bowls. So at the end of the day, it's a lower compression engine. But if you swap this stuff out without paying attention, you can wind up with actually too much compression and so on and so forth. But there are race engine experts that build fantastic B engines that are reliable, I think, make tons of horsepower. But I have to imagine that by the time you've spent the money to do that, or if you've gone too crazy, then your low-end drivability and just your behavior kind of goes out the window. And what I love about the Supercharger is that you can take a boring engine and bolt that thing onto it, and once your wallet recovers, there is no downside. They actually, on an actual emissions check, for example, like I tune my cars up using my gas analyzer. This car got a lot cleaner when I put the Supercharger on it.
Wow.
And I can go into technical reasons for that nobody cares about. But so you have low end torque even when you're not on boost. They're faster off the line because the path of atomizing the fuel from the little single carburetor compared to, say, the twin SUs, more airflow over the jet, so you're immediately atomizing it better, swirling it in the Supercharger, forcing it into, et cetera. So even if you don't have any boost going, it's a nicer driving experience for putting around town. And then once you put your foot in it, it makes that neat little whine.
Yeah, it's cool.
Yeah, it is cool. It's just neat.
So when these cars are stock, will they keep up with modern day traffic?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes. So if you're really... you will absolutely win many races where the other person doesn't know you're racing. So, I was coming around a corner going onto the on-ramp. This is embarrassing. This is pre-Supercharger, but I was going... I'm in my little B, and I'm doing a big sweeping corner on ramp onto I-76, and in my mind I'm Fangio. It's like I'm that close to a four-wheel drift, even though I'm not. And I'm going along, and boy, there's my target, and I'm gonna blow past this car, and I did. I blew right past her in her minivan on the cell phone, putting on makeup. I smoked her, So, but to be fair though, if you're even kind of just paying attention to your driving, and other people are driving the way most other people drive, you will easily keep up. On US 36, again, pre-Supercharger. In fact, I don't really go faster with this because I'm scared of destroying the car. It just gets me to my target speed faster. But I'm always in the fast lane, wishing people would move. So that's with any.
When these cars are stock, will they do like 65, 70 comfortably, or are they pretty strung out at those RPMs?
Oh, no. They're. I think 80. I mean, 80 is maybe a little strung out for long distances.
Yeah.
But not terribly, and especially if you have an overdrive or a 5-speed, then it's much easier yet. But no, highway speeds are easy. Now, they're revving higher than a modern car. I mean, you're in an old car, so you kind of have to expect the old car experience. But and shout out to MG for having supposedly primitive suspensions, and yet they're nice and they're stable and they don't wear tires. I mean, they're predictable and safe feeling. MGBs, I think, are the most user-friendly. Like, you can take anybody and put them in a B, and they'll be comfortable driving it. If they know how to shift a stick, that's all. The rest of the car will just feel like a nice car. In fact, the least modern feeling thing about it is the lack of cup holders, I think, as far as road competency, But
so we've talked a little bit about the engine. We've kind of talked about some of the carburetor stuff. The car in general, when they come in the shop, what are some of the big common failure points?
Oh, gosh. Okay.
Is it like typically electronics? Is it suspension, brakes? What typically goes wrong?
Suspensions are always worn out because it's not a fun job for hobbyists.
Okay.
Anytime you're fighting springs, I mean, anybody slightly competent can do it, but by the time you get under an MG, most people don't find suspension work enjoyable. And if you're from anything other than a nice rust-free climate, then torches and cut-off wheels and all kinds of things just to do suspension work can really make it so unappealing that very often you'll you'll gain a lot just by, and when I say gain a lot, I just mean the manners. The suspension will never get so bad that it strands you.
Right.
You know.
What's the setup? Is it it's independent in the front?
Yeah, independent. So unequal length A-arms in the front, and the upper A-arm and the shock absorber are one and the same thing.
Okay.
So it's what they call a lever shock, and it's so popular to get rid of that lever shock for tube shock conversions and so on. I say don't do it. I think the original lever shocks last forever, and well, they last a long time, and they do a great job. And I spent the money for one of those fancy coil-over adjustable suspension kits, and I dialed it in, and I found a few engineering weaknesses, which I improved on. But at the end of the day, and the main reason I got it was because I thought, oh, this will allow me to corner balance and get the ride height just perfect and adjust it and tweak it and everything. I hated it. Every time you'd go over a bump, the steering wheel would continue to shake. And, we do alignments here. We have the, all that. But the tires, an MGB will just go forever on a set of tires. Front and rear, they kind of wear evenly if everything's decent. I immediately saw uneven tire wear, and I hated that thing. I got rid of it, and I went back to the factory, because it's solid and it's reliable and it's predictable. And even though I've made it, this is the biggest fake Rolex ever. There's nothing race car about it except the stickers, right? And the fancy race suspension, I'm like, nope, I'm kind of liking what the factory did.
Now, let's talk about the rear, because I think this is a common complaint among car enthusiasts. Solid rear axle, right?
Solid rear axle on leaf springs. Yes, it is a complaint. And I solved that one too by putting a fancy multi-link suspension back there, and with the same adjustable everything in mind. And actually, after I did all that work, I liked it, but the polyurethane bushings, there was nothing I could do to stop them from squeaking. I think I will write a check for $1,000 if somebody can give me a works every time my poly bushes won't squeak recipe, subject to proving it. But so it squeaked a lot. It squeaked and groaned, but also the links are all adjustable, and as the axle goes, as the wheels move up and down, the axle doesn't stay horizontal to the car, right? One tire is hitting a bump more than the other, and the adjustable links were locked together with jam nuts, and the twisting of the car as it goes over bumps would always crack the jam nuts loose. In fact, the first time I did this on a customer's car, and they were like, you left all these nuts loose. And I was like, man, that seems unlikely. But I fessed up to it, and I was like, okay, I'll tighten them down again. And every time that car came in, the nuts were loose, and on my own car, they were loose. And at some point, I was like, do I just have to weld all this up? Anyhow, it was slightly better than the leaf springs, but it wasn't. I ultimately just stuck the leaf springs back. I have some very high-end suspension parts that are for sale.
Really sold them,
and
so you think that the solid axle leaf spring thing is okay on these cars?
It's okay, and I know there's better options, and I haven't exhausted my resources looking for the best. I think that Frontline 5-link is probably really cool, but I don't know firsthand. But it's not bad. I mean, how hard are you really driving it? I mean, Colorado has the shittiest roads in the United States. By the way, I'm calling you out, Colorado, for your crappy roads. I drive Citroen DSs, Tommy. I drive those, and I was trying to figure out how can I make them ride smoother. The answer is to move, So, anyhow, but
where do these cars rust? What are the common rust areas?
They rust. The typical, you'll always see little bits along the rocker panel.
Okay.
And right here, where they call it the dog leg for some reason. So behind the front wheel, ahead of the rear wheel, those are the earliest available rust spots. You'll see those. And the nice thing about them is that usually the rust shows up on the outside of the car first.
Interesting.
So if you have one that looks a little rusty on the outside, you don't need to condemn the whole car over it.
That's good to know.
Yeah, and also they're actually a really strong unibody structure. So they have pretty deep rocker panels, and then the 3 layers behind those. And the transmission tunnels are not removable cardboard. I'm calling you out, Triumph now. Okay, they're actually welded steel as part of the car. And so the bodies are strong even when they're rusty. I mean, I can put a pretty rusty MGB on a 2-post lift and still open and close the doors.
Interesting.
I can take a perfectly restored Triumph and not be able to make that same claim. So sorry if I'm making Triumph people mad, you know. And I love Triumphs; they're cool. They have all the styling. They had lots of things that are cool. But if I actually was going to call out a car for quality, it would be MG over Triumph. So
transmission's pretty good.
The 4-synchro MGB transmission is almost good enough to be Japanese.
Wow.
I think that's actually a strong box. The ratios are a little weird for most people, but again, you know, how sophisticated are you really? The synchros never wear out, but occasionally they'll break. Third gear synchro will actually just break, and so you go from shifts fine to, always crunching. But they're actually durable. The 3-synchro box that this car came with originally, I don't like those. They're a little frail.
Okay.
They have lay shaft bearing problems, which the factory later upgraded. And it's like anything else. There's also people that prefer the shifting feel of the older transmission.
Of course.
Part of my bias is that by the time I'm dealing with transmissions, it's because they're broken, right? So I view all British gearboxes as terrible. And the parts availability for them of any quality is getting less. And I've the labor to do transmission work is so high and the net result is so mediocre that I encourage people that are paying a shop rate to get away from British transmissions. Now, if you're a good do-it-yourselfer or if you already have a good transmission, keep it, you know. Yeah. And the electric overdrive is such a it is mechanically the most elegant, awesome device.
That's cool.
I just love them. They're fun. It's just, there's something so cool about flicking a switch and having your car drop a gear. I mean, it's second only to an ejector seat, you know?
So the interiors, obviously, this one is one of the nicest interiors I've ever seen. What should people look out for? Early ones, cooler, are parts available? Later ones, pretty dumpy looking? Which one's better?
The interiors, it's sort of a matter of taste in a way. The later ones have more of that plastic in them. Mm-hmm. So they have like the center console assembly that is plastic that doesn't suffer fools gladly, that kind of breaks often and things like that.
Yeah.
The padded dashboards don't put up with sun and things like that. And you could make a case that they're not as attractive, but really that's an aesthetic opinion,
preference,
right? So it is my preference, and it is the preference of many. But in the interiors, I mean, the seats, they're different year to year, but none of them are offensively terrible. And if you don't like your headrests, just take them out. They just lift out, you know. So interior-wise, I like the simplicity of the older cars, and it seems like there's, like the window cranks are less likely to break, and I like the look, but there's nothing to really shy away from. I would not buy an MG based on its interior.
Okay.
That's an aesthetic choice. There's nothing inherently bad. And parts-wise, you can get anything. There's multiple different sources for quality interior components. And like do-it-yourselfers can make beautiful interiors, even if it's kind of your debut at that.
That's cool.
Doing seats from the kits is a little bit tough if you don't know what you're doing, but it's, they're fine.
So what are the biggest pitfalls people fall into when buying an old MGB? Is it rust? Is it mechanical? Is it expecting a great car for a little? What's kind of the big issue? That most newbies to the MGB world fall into?
It's probably not even an MG thing. It's probably an anybody buying a classic car thing.
Okay.
Like, so few of them live up to the dream, right? They look really cool, and they're so fun, and you're used to your modern car, and then you get in your old car, and you're like, wow, this just isn't that. Although you can see out of it, and there's like all these other things that are so much better. I mean, modern cars, I finally learned. I had the use of a Nissan Rogue. I was driving an old DS out to the East Coast, and you could see everything. I could see out the back, and I could have cool air on my face and warm air on my feet, and I could go as fast as my brain could process and all that. And then I got in this Nissan Rogue, and it's blinking at me and nagging at me, and the temperature is all the same no matter where you set it, and the pillars are so thick that you have to move your head to see around things. Once your pillars are wider than your pupils, you've got a blind spot. But if they're narrower, you have no blind spot. It's panorama because your brain autofills, Anyhow. But I'm sorry, I'm getting off track.
It's interesting, yeah.
The new car, the new owner experience. Spend the money. If you don't know how to vet a car on your own, have somebody that knows what they're doing, check it out, and at least give you a laundry list. Like, some things are fatal, right? If you have a rod knock, it better be a really nice car otherwise to make it a sensible purchase. Other things are optional.
What about the rubber bumper thing? Because if you look at an early car like this, extremely valuable relative to MGBs. If you look at a rubber bumper car, 5 to 10K will get you a pretty good one. Would you say skip the late ones altogether and just get an early one?
No, because there's actually things about the late cars that are, believe it or not, there's things about the late cars that are better.
Yeah?
Yeah, and maybe not hugely better, but the later cars do tend to be less rusty.
Okay.
Now, part of that's just because they're newer,
Yeah.
and part of it's probably that crappy Stromberg carburetor that kept it off the road for so many years that the body survived better, you know. And the rubber bumpers. First of all, if you have ambitions to restore a car, there is, again, back to various people. Moss is one of them. There's a kit for converting your rubber bumper B to chrome.
Okay.
So you can in fact, I have a nice rubber bumper B. I lowered it to this ride height because I just liked looking at it better. And that car is white. And I think the white with the black rubber bumpers kind of works, and it doesn't even bother me. It never even occurred to me, I should switch it out, because it's not there. I think the farther away we get from them, like Tommy, I would expect kids, pardon me, right, your age, would care less about, you're a car aficionado,
I don't care,
but
though,
the average person that just wants a fun sports car, I don't think could give a crap about chrome versus rubber. And actually, a friend of mine was going to have us convert his car to chrome bumpers. Not us, this is where I used to work. Shout out to them too, because Sports Car Craftsman's awesome. And when we first opened, a friend of mine was going to have his rubber bumper be converted to chrome bumpers. Now, you kind of do it as part of a paint job because you're cutting metal to do it. But he was signed up for that. He was on his way to the shop, and he got rear-ended hard. And he bounced across the intersection, and it jacked up the girl's car that hit him, and his car was fine. I mean, honestly, you could not see that big rubber bumper, because there's internal support and structure too. And that was so monumental to him that he was just like, forget it, I'm keeping the rubber. So, they're heavy and they're not aesthetically what everybody wants to see, but really, they look fine. If you didn't have that preconceived notion that they integrate with the body nice enough, and they'll help.
Right.
So
now here's the $1 million question, right? So you've got $15,000-$20,000, maybe $10,000 to $20,000, and you want the British sports car experience. You don't really care which one you get. You're looking at an MGB. You're looking at a Spitfire from Triumph.
MGB. sorry, Triumph.
Like immediately. That's not even like which one is better. Like these are that far ahead of the Triumphs. Triumph people, plug your ears.
I'm going, especially because the Triumph owners are so good to us.
Right.
I love but no, if you were looking to duke it out in the real world, the MGB, again, I mean, you can any old car can be fixed and made awesome, right? I mean, if you love the way the Spitfire looks, or something like that, or if you like the fact that it's even smaller yet, which is really cool.
Yeah.
And in the sales brochure, you can start listing things like wooden dashboards and independent rear suspensions and all kinds of cool things like that, which in reality don't really translate to anything that amazing.
Oh, jeez.
So after this, I need to enter the witness protection program because I'm kind of nervous now because I'm cutting off half my.
No, but this is going to be watched by people that aren't TEDx clients.
I'm counting on that.
Just want a British sports car.
In fact, anybody that knows me, please tune it out. Do it now.
But MGBs are better than Spitfires overall?
They are inherently more durable. I believe, so this is the problem. I want to say things like the MGB handles better. Well, I've never put either one on a skid pad.
Right.
So I can't say this from a scientific sort of way. But if I was going to put my kid in one and want a nice, predictable car that didn't do a Ralph Nader overroll in a hard corner, it's going to be a B over a Spitfire.
Right.
The overall, the body on frame construction is, when you first restore one, it's nice for a few weeks, but you just can't keep it there. Things just start shaking and moving and rattling, and it's a constant, and that's part of the charm of British cars. If you're into the British word is fettling, right?
Right.
If part of it is taking something that is inherently bad and making it awesome, any British car gives you a lot of creative license. Triumph more than MG. Okay,
So overall, as an ownership experience, being that you have owned a lot of these, worked on a lot of these, is it worth buying an MGB?
Yes.
Wow.
Because
that's a yes.
Yeah, it is a yes. Now, and I never even wanted one. So this one was actually given to me.
Okay.
I never even wanted it, and I fell in love with it. Now I'm like, no, this is the car that I'm going to die with.
There you go.
My other cars may or may not. Depends on my timeline. But MGs, oddly enough, old Rover sedans, which don't deserve, I mean, they're really cool and interesting, but for some reason, those old Rover sedans and MGs, I think, incur a high owner loyalty.
There you go.
And that's from the experience of owning them, driving them, looking at them.
Loving them. Well,
Yeah.
Ted, the expert has spoken.
Tommy.
You heard it here first.
And I have.
It's worth, it's worth buying an MGB. Who would have thought?
Yeah, even now.
Unreal. Well, guys, thank you for watching this expert buyer's guide. We've talked all about the MGB. Let us know in the comment section below what British car you want to know next, and we'll try to grab it for you and do a video with Ted. I think a Spitfire would be fun. If you hate your Spitfire,
We got to do Sharon.
Yeah.
Sharon needs to bring hers.
Let us know what you guys think. We'll see you in the next video.